Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel. So there are tons of videos online about soldering, how to work with an iron, and what tools you need to get started. And there are even a good few videos about making your own audio cables, how to solder XLRs. And while these are great resources, I want to dig a bit deeper today. If you're new to making your own cables, soldering, or electronics in general, be sure to jump over to my website, DcSoundOp.com, and check out the resources there for other YouTube channels and websites to follow. So I originally set out yesterday to put new ends on this 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve snake that I got cheap on eBay, and I wanted it to go to XLR male so I could patch my Market the Unicorn Ultralight. The outputs are 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve, and I just needed a few more channels to XLR. Now, of course, I could have just bought one of these. They're not that expensive nowadays, but I want to get back into soldering regularly. It's been a few years since I've done any big soldering projects, especially any paid ones, and I absolutely need more practice on this new Hosa 951 iron. It is far more capable than I am at the moment. So while I could go into detail about how I've made cables in the past, beyond the fundamentals, it's really up to you to decide how you want to make your cables for each specific application in the future. So rather than talk about my approach, which is absolutely worthy of criticism, I thought it would be far more educational to take a look at the bigger picture. So today we're going to open up factory cables from a whole bunch of different manufacturers, and we're going to look at and talk about how they do it. I've pulled out as many different cables as I can from around the workshop. I've got cables here from Horizon, from Mogami, Canary. I've got a couple here from Whirlwind we can take a look at. I've got a Hosa adapter here that actually needs a new end, and we'll fix that in this video as well. Then I've got this random blue microphone cable over here. I'm not sure where that came from. I've got an EWI cable here, and this is from AudioPile, one of my favorite small suppliers. Then I've got a couple more from production houses that I would consider professional. It's just, you know, VTG cable with Neutrik ends, and then Alden cable with Switchcraft ends here. And then I've got this Monster ProLink cable here. These can be expensive with the real Neutrik ends on them. And then this Livewire cable here with the newer Neutrik ends on them. We'll take a look at all of these. I've even got an Audinate Avio adapter here, a Dante network adapter, just to see how they're wiring these XLRs on the ends of those. So let's jump right in and see what we've got. Before we start, I should mention that all of these cables are a number of years old. All have been in service since new, and none have been opened previously to my knowledge. Current manufacturing techniques may have changed in recent years though. First up, we have a Whirlwind cable, an Acusonic Plus 2, and I have always liked these cables myself. The outer jacket can be a bit tricky to work with for coiling, but they hold up really well over time. So we can see how the strain relief on the connectors really bites into the jacket nice and firm. They've only stripped enough of the outer jacket away to allow the wires to reach the cups, which is perfect. There is a fair amount of solder being used here, and some exposed wire extending beyond the cups, but otherwise this is a very firm connection. Next up, we have the Monster cable with genuine Neutrik ends. These are fine cables if you can afford the Monster markup. Again, that strain relief is doing its job and biting into the jacket very nicely. Another tidy effort in stripping just enough outer jacket, and with the exception of the one white lead, all the wires have been cropped short enough to make it entirely into the cups. A bit more restraint shown here with the overall amount of solder applied, but with a very similar approach to Whirlwind. Moving on to the LimeWire Advantage with the newer XX series Neutrik connectors. Again, the strain relief on these newer connectors does a great job of biting in. You can see a bit more of the outer jacket has been stripped, and the individual leads may not have been cropped to the same length. If you look closely at the black lead of the male connector, it's bent from being longer than the white lead. On the female connector, the issue is reversed. Stray whiskers, like you can see on the ground here, can lead to trouble down the road, so it really is best to police those as much as possible up front. And now we're looking at the VTG cable with Neutrik ends. Again, the strain relief is doing its job. The outer jacket here is stripped very short, causing the red lead to enter the cup at an angle there. Consistency from pin to pin in the amount and the control of the solder is less than ideal, but this cable is also lower quality and more difficult to work with in my experience than the others we've seen so far. And the individual lead jackets will melt easily if you're not careful with this type of cable. And moving on to the EWI Starline from AudioPile. I've owned a ton of these personally, and I can't ever remember needing to open one up for a repair repair. They use a knockoff Neutra connector, which does a respectable job. You can see they add a thick layer of heat shrink that serves as a label and gives the strain relief something more to bite into. The individual leads are cropped quite short, and the heat shrink appears to be adding tension to the leads as they enter the cups at an angle, but they are rock solid and have not given me any issues assembled this way over the years. Next up, we have the Audinate Avio Dante adapters. Now, I really like these in concept and on paper, but honestly, I think I'm going to be disappointed in the long run after looking under the hood. For an item that retails for $120 US, they've used some very inexpensive parts, Yongsheng XLR connectors, and some of the strangest feeling outer jacketed cable that has just very thin conductors. The soldering job is on the rough side for my taste, and I just don't see these holding up for years at a time. And let's take a quick pause from the action to go back to prepping our snake. And we're back at it with the Alden cable and Switchcraft ends. Now, I'm not here to promote my preferences, use whatever you like, but I personally don't care for these Switchcraft XLR connectors at all. And the whole thing requires tools to take it apart, and it can be destructive if you tighten that strain relief down too hard and cut into the conductors. The soldering job here is tidy, with the female end being a bit more to my liking in terms of the amount of solder compared to the male end that's been kind of globbed on there, but otherwise a nice job of keeping things clean and the conductor lengths even. And on to this really blue microphones cable, and that is the company Blue Microphones. The fact that the cable is blue is just a coincidence. I'll get it out of the way now. These gold-plated or colored knockoff Switchcraft clone ends are junk. You can see they've used a large white heat shrink and kept the individual leads incredibly short once again. You'll notice here that they also have connected the ground wire not only to pin 1, but also to the shell of the connector. I can't wait to hear the debate on who does and does not do that to their XLR cables in the comments below, but I personally don't. Now the good stuff. I really like working with Canary cable. This cable is just luxurious to work with. It's flexible and easy to solder. You can see they've taken a good amount off the outer jacket, leaving just enough for the strain relief to bite into, and this is done to allow enough flexibility to make the connections with the 2 wires per pin. The arguments for and against the quad conductor cable like this are vast, and they're not always a benefit over traditional cables. The work here is fairly consistent. Making 2 connections per cup can be tricky, and it takes patience to do this well, especially without melting or charring the surrounding leads. Staying in the luxury class, we've got the Mogami quad cable here, and the assembly is almost identical to that of the Canary. I'd dare to say that they've done just a bit better of a job here on soldering consistency. They've done better getting the leads into the cups, and overall they've just made a nicer presentation with their work. I'm not sure how easy this particular cable is to work with around heat, but again, they've managed not to blemish that clear cable there, which is really impressive. And a simple Horizon cable is up next, again with another bad Switchcraft style XLR variant. Needing a tool to open an XLR connector for a quick look is something I would really try to avoid in any professional environment these days. Beyond that, this is your basic meat and potatoes job here. Nearly no strain relief to speak of in these connectors, so your soldering better be solid. The jacket is clipped nice and clean, the individual leads are just right, and the soldering is tidy and consistent. I don't like them, but I do respect the simplicity. Now, onto my broken Hosa adapter. I was traveling with the DJ last month, and he pulled this broken adapter out of his bag for the booth output of his mixer. It was all jacked up, so I traded him for a working one for my kit. I've got this spare Whirlwind end here that came out of an install, so I'll prep that and stick it on. First, we need to remove the crappy old XLR and buzz out the conductors to see what's connected where on the TRS end. You could just take a look normally, but this one has heat shrink covering it. I'm using the continuity setting here that simply beeps to let me know when I've found the correct conductor. Once that's sorted, I'll remove the old install wire from the replacement end. I use these small 50-cent clamps and the bigger $1 clamps a lot when soldering. I find them really helpful, along with a good pair of tweezers you see me using here. Once that's taken care of, I trim and then retin the ends of the wires we're about to work on, along with retinning the solder cups on the replacement XLR. There was a lot of old solder built up in these cups, so I used this inexpensive solder sucker from my Heiko on-the-go kit to clean that out before applying fresh solder. With fresh solder in the cups and the wires pre-tinned, it's as simple as applying heat to the cup to remelt the new solder and carefully inserting the wires. Don't dwell or hang out on the pins too long with your iron, as you will risk melting the plastic. A good chunky tip on your iron will make this much easier than the fine pointed tips lots of irons come with these days. I personally use the T15 D24 chisel tip from Hosa. Allow it to cool before you let go so that the wire stays where you want it to, and then check your work again with the meter. That should be it, so let's see how I did. Not too bad for a bunch of old reused parts, though I'm sure I'll be getting hate mail for years telling me how incompetent I am. Now, let's quickly check back in with the eBay snake conversion. I've cleaned up and reattached the TRS ends I want to keep on this snake. They were a bit of a mess, and it only took a few minutes, so I redid all 4 of those, adding some heat shrink along the way. Once again, removing the unneeded TRS ends, putting those aside, and prepping the new XLR ends by first putting on the boot.
I am not offended.
Don't forget to put the boot on first, or you will be redoing all of your work. I then cut all 4 lines to the same length, giving us fresh ends to work with. No matter how long you've been doing this, it never hurts to give yourself a reference for what you're doing. And once again, we're down to tinning the wires, tinning the cups, and then making the connection carefully at each one. You'll see me forming the leads into the shape I want prior to attempting to connect them to the cups. I've also added some heat shrink along with the boot earlier to give the strain relief some help on these hard jacketed cables. And that's about it, so let's clean up and see how we did. Well, there's always room to improve, and I'll be practicing with this new iron a lot in the coming months to get more consistent working with different materials. Having used mostly portable irons recently, it's definitely taking some getting used to just to deal with how fast a good bench iron gets things happening. I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope that was an interesting look at how cables are actually made for the most part across a good number of brands of cables that are used professionally. So that's it for this time. It is 100 degrees here today. I've got to get out of the shop. It is way too hot in here. Thanks for watching, and thanks to everybody who supports these videos directly, especially Hosa for sending over these awesome tools for us to use. All their other cheaper irons are fantastic, but if you at all have the budget, I tried to justify it before and came to the conclusion that like over $100 for an iron, I don't make my living doing this kind of work generally, so it's pretty hard to justify, right? Now that I've had this for a few weeks and I've been using it, if you do this at all and you have the budget, it's incredible the difference this makes. I'm going to do a video on this separately. Thank you so much to Hosa for sending the FX951 and this FA400. This is another thing. Definitely makes a little bit of noise, but the cool part is you stand it on the desk like this. You don't generally set it up like this. This is for wide area smoke that'll suck it in. But if you're working on your workbench, you set it up like this. So this is flat to the table, and it sucks all the smoke in right through this front opening and filters it, and that keeps it pretty quiet as well. It's another one of those things that seems expensive and excessive until you have one, you use it for a little bit, and I can't imagine going back to not having one. That's it for this time. Thanks again. Check out the links down below to the website. I'm starting to sweat. Jump over to Patreon if you want to make more of these videos with me. I'll see you next time.